Amen. 1 Kings chapter 3, we want to draw your attention to really Solomon here as he's praying for wisdom. But we'll read verse 9 again. Verse 9, really, we have Solomon, some of the things that he said in prayer. We read, "Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this, thy so great a people?" There's a man named Harry, and he was on a drive one day with his wife, and all of a sudden he was pulled over by the police. The policeman said to Harry, "Sir, do you know just how fast you were driving?" And he said, "Sorry, I don't know," playing stupid. He knew fine well he was speeding. He said, "I'm sorry, officer, my cruise control was out of control. I didn't realize that the speed had changed." And of course the wife was sitting beside him, and she nudged him and she said, "Dear, you're lying to that officer. I told you 5 minutes ago that you were going too fast." And Harry gave his wife a look that could kill. The officer then looked at the back of the car, was checking the car mechanically, and he noticed that a tail light had went out. And he said, "Sir, you have a tail light out. Did you know that? I'm going to have to book you." And he said, "I'm sorry." Harry said, I didn't realize I had a tail light out. Must have just went out as I left the house." Again, the wife, she made a comment. "Officer, he's lying to you. I told him to get that fixed 3 weeks ago." Finally, the policeman noticed that Harry hadn't his seatbelt on. And he said, "Sir, I'm definitely going to have to book you. You haven't got your seatbelt on." Now, before the wife could pick up this time or pipe up, Harry looked over at his wife, and she knew not to say anything. The policeman then, he looked at the wife, and he said to her, "Madam, does your husband always treat you like this?" And the wife, she smiled and she said, "No, dear. Usually my husband's lovely to me. He's only like this when he's had one too many drinks." Not the most wisest thing to say in those circumstances, I'm sure you'll agree. I think if there's one thing that we all feel and all certainly recognize, and especially in all that's going on today, we all see the great need for wisdom. Wisdom. This is man's great need. Now, what do we mean by wisdom? Because if you were to look purely academically, educationally at our society today, you would say this is the wisest of any generation that we've ever been in. We have more qualifications today, more university graduates. Individuals seem to all have some form of qualification. We can travel farther than we've ever been able to travel. We can travel higher than we have ever been able to travel. The question we must ask ourselves is, are we really as wise as previous generations? And I'm sure you'll agree with me that the old adage very much stands true. Common sense really isn't that common after all. Now here's Solomon, and he feels his need of wisdom. He feels his great, great need of wisdom. He's just ascended the throne, just taken over his father, who of course has ruled with strength, with fortitude, yes, but also you could say in a measure with great wisdom. And before really taking on the task, he is now sitting on the throne in a sense, but before really entering into his task in its full sense, we read verse 8 that here's Solomon, and he states, "Thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude." Here he is, and he feels his need. Sees the huge amount of people that he has responsibility for, the huge sphere of influence that he has. And God states to him that he could ask for anything, and he simply prays for wisdom. "Give to your servant an understanding heart." And folks, there are many things that are nice to have and good to have and in their place, proper to have. But I want to suggest to you this evening that one of the necessary things that you need is wisdom. Wisdom. You read through the book of Proverbs, the very book that this man who's praying for wisdom wrote. Thousands of little sayings and pithy sayings, Proverbs of Solomon. What did he state? He states in Proverbs 4 verse 7, wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. It's the principal thing. Solomon deals with many things in the book of Proverbs, but the main thing, the principle, the key, the most important thing he tells these individuals that he's writing to get is wisdom. Child of God, it's the same with you. We all need wisdom. You need wisdom. Wisdom in your walk, wisdom in your ways, wisdom with your words. We live in an increasingly skeptical society. Society is ever doubting God, ever doubting the reality of the Lord, and therefore we need great wisdom to show the reality, the veracity of the fact that there is a God in heaven and he impacts our lives. So we need wisdom. And here's Solomon, and he's praying. He's praying for wisdom. And the Lord gives it to him. That's wonderful. The Lord gives to us wisdom. And so tonight I want to just think about Solomon here and want to really enter into where he's at, and of course this great prayer for wisdom. I want to see firstly here the deficiency he detected. The deficiency he detected. Read verse 7 now. O Lord, my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. It's not long since David, Solomon's father, has passed away. And Solomon, he then inherits this throne really of his father. It's a huge undertaking. Responsibility for tens, hundreds of thousands of people. Now remember, the Lord has blessed Israel as a nation under his father's long jurisdiction. They, of course, they wavered under their first king, King Saul. He gave God's people over to their lusts. He granted their request, but he sent leanness into their soul whenever they asked for King Saul to be their first king. But of course they have known the blessing of God under his father's jurisdiction. And Solomon feels this. Yes, he's observed his father's mistakes. He's very, very well aware of them. He has lived to see them. He's lived to experience them. But Solomon knows that deep down, underneath it all, he's a man after God's own heart. And so watching his father conduct himself as king and surveying all of his responsibilities, he states in verse 7, I am but a little child. Now what did he mean by this? Because Solomon is not a baby, he's not even adolescent at this stage. What did he mean when he was saying he was but a little child? The term in the Hebrew, it has the idea of a lack of experience. That's really what he's saying here. A lack of experience. He feels himself to be but a child in experience. Children, of course, they are young, but that's one of the aspects of being young, being a child, being a youth. You lack experience in life. And that's the thought here. Solomon, he looks at his need to rule righteously, to rule justly, to rule fairly, and he realizes that he cannot do it by himself. That he was but a little child, that he seriously lacked the ability in and of himself, the capacity to do this. He sees his lack of wisdom, his lack of prudence, and so what does this do? It then drives him to his knees in prayer. To say, Lord, I feel that I am but a child. Now, of course, he was going to be the wisest of all men. And yet here he is. He sees and he feels his genuine lack of ability to do what God has asked him to do. And so he prays. See, wisdom, folks, is not an automatic. It needs to be attained. It is not merely a given, it needs to be gotten. You tonight all lack wisdom. We all lack wisdom. Remember that whenever you're born in sin. And yes, Jesus Christ enters into your heart and life when you become a Christian. And yes, the book of 1 Corinthians tells us that Christ is made unto us wisdom and righteousness. So Christ is our wisdom. And he does give you wisdom. Thank God for that this evening. But folks, let's not forget that one of the offshoots of being in sin, and even being a fallen creature to this very day, is the fact that we are all foolish to a lesser or a greater degree. Whenever you read through the book of Proverbs, that again, Solomon wrote the vast majority of them anyway, you see this great contrast between the righteous and the wise, and the wicked and the foolish. And what he's really saying, what he's really getting at is this, is that when you're in sin, you're marked by folly. Folly. And yes, as you are righteous, as you begin to live righteously, then you do increase in wisdom. But let's not forget, folks, that naturally we gravitate towards that which is unwise. And we need wisdom. And yes, we all may possess a certain level of wisdom to a greater or a lesser degree, but that shows you this, my friend, that no matter who we are in life tonight, yes, in Jesus Christ, we still need wisdom. We all need wisdom. Wisdom is a grace. It's a grace. It's a grace like forbearance. It's a grace like long-suffering. It's a grace like peace and meekness. So it's not an automatic. It's a given. It's given by the Spirit of God. And I trust that you feel this evening. You feel your great lack. It needs to be sought. Like Solomon, if Solomon, the wisest of all the men of the East, the wisest of any of Israel's kings, felt his own lack of wisdom, then how much more should we feel our lack of ability and wisdom? 1 Corinthians 2:14 tells us, the natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God. They are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. So even Paul here, who's writing to believers, let's not forget, what does he say? He states the natural man in our sin, and even outside of the Spirit of God, outside of walking in the Spirit. Whenever spiritual things come our way, and God brings them your way, they are as foolishness to you. And you need the Spirit of God then. To take the wisdom that God imparts, or that God is bringing to you, you need the Spirit of God to imbibe that. And then to apply that. There's a tremendous text in Job 32, verse 9. And it says this: great men are not always wise, neither do the aged understand judgment. And this is Elihu speaking here. And he's actually rebuking Job's 3 previous friends that had come to him. Remember, these were wise individuals. These were Job's friends. They thought they were giving him good advice, but they weren't. And Elihu, he makes it clear. This is truth. This is what God has recorded for us here this evening. Great men and aged men are not always wise. What's Elihu saying there? He's saying very simply this, that even the older individuals, or the so-called great men of society, they do not always have wisdom. See, it doesn't always naturally follow that if you're 60, that you're going to be more wise than a 20-year-old and vice versa. It doesn't always fall like that. Often it does because you have life experience, but not always, folks. Not always. So you could have an individual who's made many mistakes throughout his life and doesn't learn from them. Doesn't. Still the same as they were when they were 20. And yes, they may have more life experience in a sense, but really all they've done is make more mistakes. They haven't learned, and they are not wise. So age does not automatically mean wisdom. Often it does. Often it does. But not always. I myself know, not speaking about here by the way, but I know individuals who are 60 or 70. And I wouldn't trust them with anything. They're not wise individuals. But I know individuals who are in their 30s, and I consider them to be some of the wisest individuals that I know. Why? Because they have taken what God imparts, they have taken that by the Spirit, and they have applied that to their own circumstances. The Earl of Shaftesbury in the 19th century once said this: education without instruction will result in a race of clever devils. It will result in a race of clever devils. He's not far wrong. Let's face it, folks. Many are educated today, and yet they have not true, genuine wisdom. Yes, they may have intellect. They may have intelligence. It's one thing to have intellect and intelligence. It's another thing to have wisdom, true wisdom. Now, what is this wisdom? That's what we're going to look at secondly. The deficiency he detected, the discernment he desired. Look at verse 9. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For he is able to judge this so great a people. Here Solomon, as I've said, he's making sacrifice in Gibeon. He's went up to Gibeon, where the tabernacle was at this particular juncture. And the Lord, verse 5, states to him, "Ask what I shall give thee." Go on, Solomon. There you are making sacrifice. You are presenting blood atonement to me. You are approaching me. I see that. I accept that. Solomon, ask whatever you want. Blank check. Here's God. Look, whatever you want, just ask, Solomon. And I love Solomon's heart here because he feels his lack. He doesn't ask for a large kingdom, doesn't ask for a long life, doesn't ask for hundreds of servants and thousands of horses and chariots. He doesn't ask for any of these things. No, very simply, verse 9, he states, "Give an understanding heart to thy servant to judge thy people, that I may discern between bad and good." He recognizes that as a king, he needs to be wise, he needs to be fair, he needs to be circumspect. He's going to make decisions that will impact the welfare of thousands. And so he's asking for an understanding heart. Now, he's not merely, I want you to follow me here, he's not merely asking for intellect. He is asking for the ability to conduct himself wisely and apply wisdom to his circumstances. In other words, he is asking God, look, when a circumstance arises, give me wisdom to react, to deal with it in a very wise manner. See, it's one thing to have information. It's another thing to take that information and apply it. What is wisdom? Wisdom is knowledge in action. And this is what we desperately need today, folks. Desperately. I would suggest to many of you that in general terms, the Church of Jesus Christ, it knows its Bible, relatively speaking. It's one thing to know Bible, it's one thing to know verses, it's one thing to be able to quote the well-known verses, even when you're evangelizing and so on. It's one thing to know the Bible in an intellectual sense. I'm sure we could all quote one or two verses here this evening. It's another thing to take the principles of Scripture and apply them to your everyday life, your everyday circumstance. What you then need is wisdom. Wisdom is knowledge or information applied. Wisdom and knowledge in action. And I'm sure you feel that. You face circumstances, situations in family life, in work, just in daily life. And I'm sure to some degree that you feel, I need to know what to do. I need to know the right thing. I need to know the right spirit even in which to handle that particular situation. Now, none of us are all called to be the king or in a sense, a role like that. But in another sense, we're all called to lead. And I've made this point before, and I again make it here this evening. We're all called to lead in varying aspects of our lives. If you have children, you're called to lead. Any form of position in an office, you're called to lead. You even think about it in terms of your standing in Jesus Christ. Whenever Jesus Christ saves you, you inherit all things with him. You are joint heirs today, right now, with Jesus Christ. Now, in a sense, folks, we now rule. We rule this world. You may not see that, you may not experience that, you may not feel that, but as Jesus Christ, as he rules, remember this one day, this world is going to change. It's going to be renovated. It's going to be made anew. And yes, he will be the King of Kings, but remember this, he has made us kings unto God. And in the new heavens and the new earth, we will rule with him and reign with him, because we shall be like him. So yes, we're going to all have a future rule in that sense. May I enter into that this evening? There is a sense in which, as a Christian, you're even called to lead in a sense that of your testimony as you live out your life. Ephesians 5:15, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. That's really what Paul's getting at here. To these Jewish and Gentile believers, walk circumspectly. Don't be foolish. Be wise. Colossians 4:5, walk in wisdom towards them that are without, redeeming the time. Who are them that are without? The unsaved, the ungodly. Walk in wisdom towards them that are unsaved. Wisdom is not merely the acquisition of knowledge, it's knowledge applied. It is the truths, the principles, the precepts of this book, taken, imbibed firstly into your heart, and then outworked in your life. It's like you observe a godly individual, and they seem to just know what to do. Not saying in every single circumstance, but in many circumstances, they seem to know what to do. What is that? It's because they have the principles of Scripture, and they have them deep within their hearts. And therefore they just know, not in an intellectual sense that they're a know-it-all, but they just know how to handle themselves, how to conduct a particular situation. That's true wisdom. This is what Solomon desired. This is what he's praying for. He's not merely praying for intellect, and he had it, by the way. He had it. He had it in absolute abundance. But he's praying for wisdom. The church secretary was going through a very difficult time. This lady, she had just lost her father. Her husband had a serious stroke as well, and it seems as though her husband wasn't going to survive. And she was shaking hands at the door with her pastor. Her pastor rightly said to her, "I'm praying for you." The lady said, "What exactly are you praying for me?" He said, "Well, I'm praying for you, as you would. I'm praying for you that you be given grace and strength in these trying circumstances." They said, "I thank you for that, but perhaps you could pray like this. Pray that I'll know not how to waste this experience." What a profound thing to ask our minister to pray for her. As she goes through this difficulty, she was going through that trying circumstance, that you would be given wisdom not to waste the circumstance and use it for the glory of God. The deficiency he detected, the discernment he desired. Lastly, then, I want you to see the discretion he demonstrated. The discretion he demonstrated. Verses 12 and 13, we read, "I have done according to thy words, lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any rise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honour, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days." Verse 10 tells us that this prayer pleased the Lord. It pleased the Lord. Verse 11, it then proceeds to explain, the Lord proceeds to explain what actually pleased him. What was it that pleased God about this tremendous prayer of Solomon? It was the fact that he didn't pray for selfish motives, selfish reasons. No, he didn't pray for the temporal things, for a long life, for riches. He asked simply for wisdom. God states, "I like that. I like that about your prayer." And verse 12, he then states he would give him a wise and understanding heart, and he even gave him all the things that he didn't ask for. And then, in the rest of the chapter, we didn't take time to read it, but you remember the immediate display of this wisdom that Solomon gave. There were two ladies, and there was one child and one deceased child. Both of them were claiming to be the owner of the child. Solomon, he immediately shows what God has given him in action. He simply says, "That's fine. I'll just take the child and I'll divide it in two. Cut it in half." Sounds like a grotesque thing to do. But he knows, Solomon, he knows the natural instinct of a mother. And of course, the true mother, what does she do? She immediately intervenes. No, that's my child. It better be, keep it alive and give it to this lady. And he knows right away, that's the true mother. What wisdom. That's certainly not merely intellect, but that is intelligence applied. It's quite drastic, yes. But nonetheless, he displays that God has given tremendous grace and wisdom. Be encouraged tonight, when you seek wisdom, the Lord then sends wisdom. He gives it to you. Yes, tonight you feel your own need, your own lack. the need to just walk circumspectly, the need to be what God desires you to be. And you're saying, look, Lord, give me wisdom, help me to walk, help me to do the right thing. God's saying, look, when you pray like that, and you don't pray for selfish motives, for selfish gain, but simply for the glory of God, that the Lord would be magnified in your actions, in your attitudes, and so on. When you seek wisdom, he gives it. And Solomon was able to write then, probably out of his own experience, in Proverbs 2 verse 6, the Lord giveth wisdom. Out of his mouth proceedeth knowledge and understanding. He wasn't just writing that academically. He experienced that. He knew what it was, not just in that instance, but as a king. Think of 1 Kings 10 later on. There was the Queen of Sheba. What did she do? She came to see the wisdom of Solomon. And whenever she saw the wisdom of Solomon, what was her response? The half hadn't been told me. She was bamboozled. Such was the wisdom on display of Solomon. What a wise man Solomon was. Was that purely because he was a gifted individual? That he knew how to handle people? Because he was a smart and intelligent individual? No. It's because he asked God for wisdom. And God gave him wisdom. Yes, child of God, you may feel your lack of intellect tonight. But thank God you can be wise. Thank God that when you ask God for genuine wisdom in terms of your conduct, that God gives you wisdom. Genuine wisdom. Not intellect, not information, but genuine wisdom. Be encouraged then. Be encouraged to seek it, because God gives it. Abraham Lincoln said, and with this I'm finished, I don't think much of a man who is not wiser today than he was yesterday. I don't think much of a man who is not wiser today than he was yesterday. I trust we'll all be like that, in a sense that we'll be wiser today, wiser tomorrow, than we are and what we were